The will said, one property, 17 dogs, and a tax bill due in 90 days. Jack read it twice. Then he called a real estate agent. The agent said the land was worth something. The shelter wasn't. He was on his way to sign the paperwork when he heard barking from inside, and then a woman's voice, low and steady, talking one of the dogs down from something. He stopped. He didn't know why yet. The rain had been falling since Tuesday, and by Friday morning Jack Calloway had stopped caring about the leaking roof above the storage room and started caring only about the dog in Kennel 7, who had not touched her food in 3 days. Her name was Rita, according to the cardboard tag zip-tied to the chain-link door. She was 11 years old, a chocolate Labrador with a gray muzzle and the patient, slightly accusatory eyes of a creature who had seen enough of the world to have formed opinions about it. The previous owner, whoever they were, had simply stopped coming. That happened, Jack had learned. People left dogs the same way they left other inconvenient things, slowly at first, and then all at once. He crouched in front of her kennel with a bowl of warm broth, the kind his aunt used to make for sick animals, a recipe he'd found scrawled in pencil on the back of a feed invoice tucked into his Uncle Gerald's desk. The desk itself was a catastrophe of papers, a sedimentary record of Gerald's last decade. Overdue notices from the county assessor's office, vaccination logs written in a hand that had grown shakier year by year, seed catalogs, a photograph of 2 boys standing in front of this same building when the paint was still white and the sign out front still had all its letters. Jack recognized the taller boy as Gerald, maybe 30 years old, grinning like the world owed him nothing, and he was fine with that. The shorter boy he recognized as his own father, who had left Maine at 19 and not come back. Jack set the bowl just inside the kennel door. Rita regarded it without moving. "I know," he said. "I'd feel the same way." He stood up and walked back through the main corridor, past the 16 other occupied kennels, past the smell of wet dog and cedar shavings, and the particular damp cold that the building seemed to manufacture on its own, regardless of what the thermometer outside said. It was mid-October in Harwick, which meant that the cold was already serious, not the theatrical kind that city people photograph for their social media, but the actual kind, the kind that got into the walls and stayed there until May. The shelter was called Harwick Haven, though the sign out front currently read Harwick Havn, and Jack had neither the money nor the certainty of tenure to fix it. He had inherited the property 6 weeks ago when Gerald died of a heart attack in the parking lot of a hardware store in Bangor, which was exactly the kind of death Gerald would have considered acceptable. He had left no wife, no children, and no will, which meant the property passed to Jack as the nearest living male relative, which was also a kind of accident. His father had died 2 years prior. His mother had never been in the picture, and his sister Denise had legally changed her surname and moved to Portland, Oregon, for reasons she had never fully explained. Jack had been living in Boston, doing freelance carpentry work and occasionally teaching a woodworking class at a community center in Somerville. He had a studio apartment and a reliable truck and no particular attachment to either. When the letter came from the county, he drove north expecting to spend a weekend sorting out paperwork. 6 weeks later, he was still here, and the paperwork had not been sorted. What had been sorted, by a county assessor named Dale who delivered bad news with the cheerful efficiency of a man who genuinely enjoyed his job, was the following. Gerald owed 4 years of property taxes on a parcel of land assessed at a value that reflected the area's recent real estate activity rather than the shelter's actual income, which was almost nothing. The total figure was $41,200. Jack had until the 1st of April to pay it, or the property would be auctioned. It was now October 14th. He had done the math. He had done the math several times, in different ways, hoping that he had made an error. He had not made an error. The shelter currently housed 17 dogs, took in donations that averaged perhaps $300 a month, had no corporate sponsor, no endowment, no social media presence of any kind, and required approximately $900 a month in supplies alone, not counting the building's ongoing need for repair, which was continuous and various and deeply personal. As if the building were aging in real time and getting querulous about it. The roof above the storage room leaked. The boiler made a sound like a man clearing his throat before delivering very bad news. 3 of the kennel runs had fencing that needed replacing. The parking lot was a composition of gravel and optimism. His savings were $12,000. He had arrived at that number by selling his truck in Boston and buying a used one in Bangor for considerably less, and by cashing out a small retirement account at a penalty he tried not to think about. It was not enough. It was not close to enough. But it was enough to keep the shelter running for a few months while he figured out what to do, and that was the deal he had made with himself. Not to solve everything at once, but to solve enough to get to the next week, and then the week after that. The problem was that the dogs needed a vet. Gerald had worked with a Dr. Paulson in town, but Paulson had retired in August and his practice was being absorbed by a larger clinic in Bangor that charged prices appropriate to a larger clinic in Bangor. The nearest affordable option was 40 minutes away and had a 6-week waiting list for non-emergency appointments. Rita in Kennel 7 probably qualified as an emergency, but emergency visits cost $400 before they started doing anything, and Jack had done the math on that too. He posted an ad on 3 different websites. Part-time veterinary technician or assistant. Housing provided. This was true. There was a small apartment above the shelter's office that Gerald had used for storage, but which contained a bed frame and a functioning bathroom. Competitive wage. This was optimistic. He had listed $300 a week, which he thought might be enough not to be insulting, but suspected was not enough to attract anyone remotely qualified. Must be comfortable with large breed dogs, tight budgets, and a building that is, he had written, a project. He got 11 responses. 7 were clearly automated. 2 were from people who wanted to know if the housing was available without the job. 1 was from a 16-year-old named Tyler who was very enthusiastic but, as he admitted in a follow-up email, not actually qualified in any way. The 11th was from someone named Claire Beaumont, who wrote incomplete sentences and said she was a licensed veterinarian currently awaiting confirmation of her Maine licensure transfer, that she had 7 years of clinical experience, that she understood the wage was modest and that was acceptable, and that she had a personal interest in shelter medicine that she would be happy to explain in person if he wanted to meet. Jack wrote back that he did want to meet. She arrived on a Thursday, driving a Subaru that was perhaps 2 years newer than his truck, but which had clearly also lived a full life. She was 33 or 34, he guessed, with dark hair pulled back in a way that suggested she had done it quickly rather than carefully, and she wore a fleece jacket over a thermal shirt and boots that were built for actual weather. She looked like someone who had made a series of practical decisions that morning and was fine with all of them. She shook his hand in the parking lot and looked at the building with the attentive expression of someone doing a rapid professional assessment. "How bad is the roof?" she said. "The one over the storage room or the one over everything else?" "There are 2 problems." "There are several problems," he said. "The roof is a medium one." She nodded slowly, which he took as a point in her favor. He had spoken with 3 potential contractors about the roof, and all 3 had responded to his descriptions of the budget with the particular silence of professionals encountering an amateur's fantasy. He showed her the facility. She asked questions that were specific and knowledgeable about the vaccination records, about the heartworm protocols, about the filtration system in the water line. She stopped at Kennel 7 and crouched in front of Rita the same way he had that morning, low and unhurried. And Rita, who had not moved toward the food bowl in 3 days, walked to the door and pressed her nose against the wire. "How long has she been off her food?" Claire said. 3 days. Maybe 4. And her gums? Pink. A little tacky. She looked up at him. "You checked her gums?" "I looked it up," he said. She looked back at Rita. "She's probably just grieving," she said. "It happens with dogs who've been surrendered. Sometimes they wait for the person to come back." She paused. "It's very sad, actually." "I know," he said. They went to the office and sat across from each other at Gerald's disaster of a desk, and he explained the situation with the taxes and the timeline and the budget. He did not minimize any of it. He was tired of the version of himself that rounded numbers upward and used phrases like challenging but manageable. And so he used the actual numbers and let them sit in the room between them. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she said, "What's your plan?" "Partial," he said. "I'm applying for 2 nonprofit grants. I'm in conversation with a woman in town who runs a rescue network about a transfer agreement that would help with intake costs. I'm going to do a fundraiser, probably in November, assuming the weather holds enough for people to come out. And I'm looking at whether there's a way to monetize the land on the north side of the property without selling it. There's about 3 acres that Gerald never used." "Agritourism," she said. "Maybe. Or a community garden lease. I don't know yet." The grant timeline is the problem, she said. Most operating grants take 3 to 5 months to process. I know. And you need the money by April 1st. I know. So you need cash income faster than the grants can provide it. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. Outside, one of the dogs in the far kennel run, a young shepherd mix named Cope who barked at weather, had started up about something and then stopped. Okay, she said. I'll take the job, but I want to be transparent about something. I'm on a professional registry in Connecticut because I filed a complaint against my former employer about the disposal of expired controlled substances, and they counterfiled claiming I had mishandled records. The countercomplaint was dismissed, but the filing is still on the registry, and it's one reason my main licensure transfer is taking longer than it should. I'm not hiding it. I just wanted you to know before you said yes. He looked at her for a moment. They fired you for filing the complaint. They called it a restructuring, and the counter-complaint was dismissed. Completely. He thought about the photo of Gerald and his father, both grinning in front of this building, both young enough to think the future was something that happened to other people. He thought about Rita, pressing her nose against the wire because she was waiting for someone. When can you start? He said. She started on a Monday. The apartment above the office was functional but grim in the way of spaces that have been used for storage and then abruptly repurposed. There were boxes of Gerald's old records stacked against one wall, a ceiling light fixture with 2 dead bulbs, and a window that faced the parking lot and let in exactly the kind of view that did not make anyone feel optimistic about the morning. Jack spent the Sunday before she arrived replacing the bulbs, moving the boxes to the shelter's actual storage area, and leaving a set of clean towels on the bathroom counter in what he recognized, even as he did it, as a very Gerald thing to do. A gesture of welcome so small, it was almost invisible. She did not comment on the towels, which he appreciated. The first 2 weeks were a period of mutual calibration. They established a rhythm that was partly negotiated and partly arrived at by necessity. Jack handled the building, the feeding, the exercise rotations, the cleaning, the bookkeeping, the grant applications, the phone calls to donors, and the ongoing diplomacy required to keep the parking lot from washing entirely into the access road. Claire handled the medical side, which in her capable and efficient way she expanded almost immediately beyond what Gerald had been doing. She set up a proper examination area in the storage room, which they had cleared and which now at least no longer leaked directly onto anything important. She reorganized the medication cabinet with a specificity that made Jack feel faintly judged by his own supplies. She established a relationship with a wholesale veterinary supply company in Portland that offered pricing she said was about 30% better than what Gerald had been paying, which she mentioned without fanfare in the same tone she used to mention that she had fixed the latch on Kennel 12. Rita started eating again on the 4th day after Claire arrived. Jack did not ask what she had done. He noticed that the food bowl in Kennel 7 had been moved to a different position, closer to the door, and that someone had placed a worn fleece blanket just inside the kennel. He assumed these were the relevant changes, but he was not sure, and the uncertainty felt appropriate. Some things worked without full explanation. They made decisions together, usually in the mornings over coffee in the office, because the office was the warmest room in the building, and also because it was the room with the whiteboard on which Jack had written, in large block letters at the top, April 1st, and below it a series of numbers that he updated every few days. The coffee was from a machine that Gerald had owned since what appeared to be the early part of the previous decade, and which produced a product that was technically coffee in the same way that a Ford Crossing is technically a bridge. Claire had brought her own coffee grinder. Jack had not commented on this either. The Maplewood Animal Rescue wants to send us 4 dogs next week, she said one morning, about 3 weeks in. She was looking at her laptop and holding her actual coffee with both hands. 3 labs and a beagle mix, all healthy, all cleared. We have space. We have space, he agreed. We don't have food budget for 4 more dogs for the month. Maplewood offers a supply stipend for transfer dogs. It's not huge, but it covers the food. He looked up. Since when? Since I called them and asked. He looked at her. She did not look up from her laptop. Okay, he said. The 4 dogs arrived on a rainy Wednesday in a van driven by a cheerful woman named Bev who wore a Maplewood Rescue vest and had a gift for unloading nervous dogs from transport vehicles with the calm efficiency of someone who had been doing it for 20 years, which she had. All 4 dogs were fine, and the 2 labs that Jack had worried about settled immediately, the way labs generally do, because labs have a constitutional generosity of spirit that makes other species look like they are not really trying. The Beagle mix, who they called Noodle because he had arrived with that name on his card, and it suited him completely, spent his first 24 hours running figure eights through his kennel run with an energy that seemed to mock all concepts of containment. November came. It came in a way that Maine always delivered November, not as a gradual thing, but as a fact, an announcement, the season presenting its credentials. The mornings went below freezing and stayed there. Jack began each day by checking the boiler, which had developed a new sound, more specific than its previous throat clearing, something he thought of as a deliberate knock, as if it were trying to communicate something in code. He had a quote from a heating contractor that was more than he wanted to know about. He deferred the boiler and bought 3 space heaters, which he placed in the kennel area in positions he calculated would do the most good. They did the fundraiser on the second Saturday of November. It was Claire's design more than his. She had suggested it 2 weeks prior with a specificity that suggested she had been thinking about it longer than 2 weeks. Not a gala, she said, not a formal event, just an open house. Let people come and meet the dogs. Put out coffee and the cider donuts from the farm stand on Route 9 that Jack had mentioned once and which she had clearly filed away. Make it feel like a community thing, because it was a community thing. 47 people came. This surprised Jack, who had expected perhaps 20 and had prepared for 30 and had been quietly worried about 20. He did not know 47 people in Harwick, but apparently 47 people in Harwick knew about the shelter or had heard about the open house through the flyer Claire had posted at the general store and the library and the hardware store and the post office, where she had, as she mentioned almost in passing, spoken with the postmaster, a woman named Sandra, who had a rescue greyhound and opinions about animal welfare that were extensive and specific. Sandra had mentioned the event to, apparently, most of the town's population. They raised $3,400 that afternoon. Not in large donations. No single check exceeded $200. But in the accumulated weight of people who bought a donut and looked at Noodle doing his figure eights and opened their wallets with the slightly rueful generosity that animals reliably produce in humans who are otherwise fairly careful with money. Jack stood in the kennel area for most of the afternoon, talking to people he was beginning to recognize as neighbors, and he was struck by the feeling, unfamiliar, slightly disorienting, of being somewhere he was supposed to be. He mentioned this to Claire that evening, when the last visitor had gone and they were cleaning up the paper cups, and the event was subsiding into the ordinary quiet of the building. She was stacking chairs near the door, and he was gathering the remains of the donut table, and the shelter dogs had settled for the night. The particular orchestral breathing and shuffling of 17 sleeping dogs providing a background that he was starting to think of as the sound of the place. "I didn't expect to feel like that," he said. She looked at him. "Like it was worth doing," he said. "Not strategically worth doing. Just worth it." She considered this. "You thought it wasn't going to be?" "I thought it was going to be a thing I did because I needed the money." "And it was that too," she said. "Yes," he said. "Both things at once." She nodded and went back to stacking chairs. He went back to the donut table. The boiler knocked twice in its new, deliberate way, and somewhere in the kennel area Noodle sighed with the theatrical depth of a dog who has decided that sleep is, after all, acceptable. The man who arrived on the Monday after the fundraiser drove a car that cost more than Jack had inherited the property in debt, which was a specific thought Jack had immediately and then felt slightly ashamed of, because the specificity of it suggested he was already in a defensive position before the conversation had started. He was in his mid-40s, the man, with the kind of professional composure that is either a personality trait or something you have to practice, and he was wearing a coat that was appropriate for Maine weather in November, but only just the way a tourist coat is appropriate. Technically sufficient, but slightly wrong for the context. He introduced himself as Marcus Webb, from a company called Coastal Acquisitions Group, which Jack had not heard of, but recognized by type immediately. The name was designed to be both specific and vague, to sound established without saying too much about what exactly was being established. Marcus Webb said he was in the area looking at several properties for a client interested in coastal residential development, and that he had come by to introduce himself because he understood Jack had recently inherited the Callaway parcel, and he wanted to make sure Jack was aware of the options available to him. Jack said he was aware of the options available to him. Marcus said he appreciated that, and that he just wanted to leave his card in case Jack's situation changed, and that he hoped the shelter was doing well. Jack said the shelter was doing well, which was at least partially true. Marcus left. Jack watched his car pull out of the gravel parking lot and turn south on the county road, and he stood there for a moment longer than necessary before going back inside. He told Claire about it over dinner that evening. They had developed a habit of eating together in the office when the workday ran long, which was most days, because the workday almost always ran long, and she listened with the attentiveness she brought to information she considered significant. Coastal Acquisitions Group, she said. You know them? I know the type. I had a situation at my old clinic with a company that was acquiring veterinary practices along the Connecticut coast. The approach is always the same. The first visit is always very cordial, and they come back with the real conversation later. What's the real conversation? Depends on the situation. In my case, it was a buyout offer that they framed as an opportunity, but was really structured to push out any vets who wouldn't agree to their cost-cutting protocols. She paused. They're interested in the land, not the shelter. The shelter is a complication to them. The shelter is a complication to me too, Jack said, which was the kind of honest thing he said sometimes before he'd fully thought it through. She looked at him steadily. No, it isn't. He thought about that. No, he said. Not in the way they mean. Marcus Webb came back 3 weeks later. This time he called ahead, which Jack thought was either a courtesy or a tactic, and he came with paperwork and a number that was, he said, a serious offer, a fair market assessment of the property given its current tax liability. The number was $41,500, which was the debt plus $500. He also came with a piece of information that he delivered with the same professional neutrality he brought to everything else. He mentioned that during their standard due diligence process, he said, standard due diligence process, the way you say something when you want it to sound routine. They had noted that the shelter's veterinary care appeared to be provided by an individual whose main licensure was still pending confirmation. He mentioned that performing medical procedures without a valid state license constituted a criminal offense in Maine. He mentioned this, he said, not as a threat, but as a concern he wanted to make sure Jack was aware of, because complications like that could affect the value of an asset. The conversation took place in the office, and Claire was not present, and Jack was aware of this as Marcus spoke, aware that she was somewhere in the building. He could hear her in the kennel area, the low murmur of someone speaking to a dog, and he was aware that what Marcus was doing was constructing a situation in which the thing that was most valuable to the shelter was also its vulnerability. He said he would need time to consider the offer. Marcus said he understood completely and left his card again, which was unnecessary because Jack still had the first one and drove away in his expensive car. That night, Jack sat at Gerald's desk for a long time without doing anything. He looked at the whiteboard. April 1st. The number below it was $28,000, which was what he still needed to raise, net of the fundraiser proceeds and the grant he had received partial approval on. Partial meaning, in this case, $7,000 of the 12 he had applied for, which had felt like a victory until he did the math. $28,000 in 4.5 months. The shelter's current monthly surplus, after expenses, on a good month, was about $600. He heard her come in from the kennel area. She poured coffee from the ancient machine. She had given up on this battle and was using the shelter's coffee, which he thought demonstrated a kind of practical acceptance he respected, and sat down across from him. He told her what Marcus had said. She did not respond immediately. She held the coffee mug in both hands the way she did when she was thinking rather than drinking, using it as a thermal object rather than a beverage object. He's going to watch the shelter, she said. He's going to wait for me to do something that crosses the line, and then he's going to use it. Yes. And the medication thing, the local supplier? He hesitated. He had not mentioned this yet. The previous week he had called their usual supplier in Bangor for a routine order and been told, with considerable awkwardness, that the company was no longer able to offer them the 30-day payment arrangement they had used for 6 years under Gerald's management. The representative had been apologetic in a way that suggested he knew perfectly well why the policy had changed and was not happy about it. He told her now. She listened. So he's not just watching, she said. He's arranging the conditions. Yes. He wants you to get desperate enough that I do something without the license, and then he has a criminal complaint to file. That's what I think. She was quiet for a moment. Outside, the wind had picked up, the kind of December wind in Maine that doesn't apologize for anything, and the building registered it in its various small ways. The draft under the office door, the sound in the eaves, the single-pane window above the desk shivering slightly in its frame. "We don't do that," she said. "We don't give him that. Whatever happens with the dogs, we call the emergency clinic in Bangor. We figure out the money after, but we don't give him the thing he's waiting for. That could cost us more than we have." "I know, and we can't sustain that." "I know that too," she said. "But if we do what he wants, it's over anyway. And at least this way it's over on terms we chose." He looked at her. The office lamp was on, the desk lamp with the green glass shade that had been Gerald's, and in its light, she looked very much like someone who had made her decision before she sat down and was simply stating it for the record. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said, and drank her coffee. The crisis, when it came on a Tuesday in late December, because crises generally don't observe aesthetic considerations about timing. A man named Tom Dressler drove up the gravel road at 7 in the morning with a dog in the back seat of his truck, a 4-year-old border collie, mix named Fun, who was in visible distress, labored breathing, pale gums, clearly not right in a way that went beyond anything a non-specialist could confidently diagnose. Tom Dressler was 60 years old, a lobsterman, and he had the kind of quiet, controlled panic of a person who does not panic easily and is therefore not good at it. Jack met him in the parking lot. Finn came out of the truck with assistance, legs unsteady, breathing in the shallow, effortful way of a dog whose body is doing something that needs to stop. "I can't get into Bangor," Tom said. "Road's iced. They closed Route 1 at the junction. I called the emergency clinic, and they said they couldn't send anyone. She's getting worse." Jack looked at the dog. He looked at the parking lot, where the ice was real. He had nearly gone down twice already that morning. And then he looked at Tom Dressler's face, which was the face of a person watching something he loved move toward the edge. He brought Finn inside. Claire was in the kennel area. She came out when she heard them, and she looked at Finn the way she always looked at animals in distress. A rapid professional assessment, everything flowing into the single question of what was happening and what to do about it. And he could see her work through it, and he could see the moment she arrived at her conclusion. "GDV," she said quietly. "Gastric dilatation volvulus. She needs surgery." "Claire," Jack said. She looked at him. He looked at her. Between them was the thing that Marcus had constructed, the line, the license, the waiting. "I know," she said. "I know." She stepped back. She straightened up. She looked at Tom Dressler. "Mr. Dressler," she said, "your dog needs immediate surgical intervention. I have the training to provide it, but my main license is still pending, which means I can't legally perform this procedure. What I am going to do right now is call every licensed vet within 100 miles and find someone who can authorize me to assist, or find someone who can walk me through this remotely as a supervising veterinarian. While I do that, Jack is going to put Finn on oxygen from our tank, which is a supportive measure, not a medical procedure." Tom Dressler stared at her. "She may not have time for that," he said. "I know," Claire said. "That's why I'm doing it right now instead of in 5 minutes." She had her phone out before she finished the sentence. Jack went for the oxygen tank, the one they used for post-surgical recovery for the shelter dogs, and he fitted the mask over Finn's muzzle as gently as he could manage, and Tom Dressler knelt next to his dog on the examination room floor and put his hand on her side, and the room contracted around this, the intimacy of emergency. Claire made 6 calls in 11 minutes. She had a list. He didn't know when she had made the list, but she had one, on her phone, of every licensed veterinarian in the surrounding counties with their personal numbers. 4 did not answer. 1 answered and said he was in surgery and couldn't help. The 6th was a woman named Dr. Barbara Okafor, a semi-retired small animal vet in Augusta, who answered on the 2nd ring and who, when Claire explained the situation in precise and rapid terms, said without hesitation, "Talk me through what you're seeing, and we'll do this together." They did it together. Dr. Okafor on speakerphone, Claire's hands doing what Claire's hands knew how to do, the voice from Augusta asking questions and giving confirmations, the technical language of the procedure filling the room like a second presence. Tom Dressler sat against the wall with his arms around his knees, not in the way of someone who didn't want to look, but in the way of someone who has decided that trust is the only available action. Finn came through it. It took 2 hours and the better part of Jack's remaining surgical supply stock, and when it was over, Claire stood at the sink washing her hands for a long time, longer than necessary, in the way people wash their hands when they are also doing something else. Tom Dressler shook Jack's hand, and then he shook Claire's hand, and then, which Jack had not anticipated, he sat down on the plastic chair by the exam room door and cried for about 90 seconds with the focused efficiency of a 60-year-old lobsterman who has decided that 90 seconds is the appropriate allocation. "What do I owe you?" he said. "Nothing," Jack said. Tom looked at him. "Nothing for today," Jack said. "Fa needs to stay for 48 hours minimum. We'll talk about the aftercare." Tom nodded. He looked at Claire. "You could have done it without the phone," he said. "It was not a question." "Probably," she said. "You did it right," he said. She said nothing to that. But he watched her, after Tom had gone out to his truck to get Finn's things, and he saw her look at the phone in her hand for a moment, at Dr. Okafor's name on the screen, and he thought he understood what she was feeling, which was not exactly pride and not exactly relief, but something that contained elements of both, and something else. The feeling of having held a line not because it was easy, but because the line meant something. He was right. He did not know this with certainty, and he would not have said it aloud that day, but he was right. Tom Dressler told 3 people about what happened, in the specific way that people in small towns tell things, not as gossip, but as testimony, as something they believe deserves to be known. One of the 3 people he told was Sandra the postmaster, who had the greyhound and the opinions about animal welfare. Sandra told, by her own later accounting, approximately 19 people. One of those 19 people was a local journalist named Pete Varga, who wrote a twice-weekly column for the Harwich Courier that was part community news and part commentary in the way that small-town journalism often is, serving multiple functions simultaneously because there are not enough people to have specialists. Pete Varga called Jack on a Thursday. He asked if Jack would talk to him about the shelter's situation, about the tax debt, about the medication supplier issue, which Tom had apparently mentioned to Sandra, who had apparently mentioned to Pete, and about the offer from Coastal Acquisitions Group, which Jack had not mentioned to anyone, but which Pete seemed to know about anyway, which is the thing about small towns that people from cities tend to underestimate. Jack said yes, he would talk to him. The story ran on a Tuesday in early January, which was, Jack thought afterward, good timing in an unplanned way, because January in Maine is the kind of month that gives people in small communities the instinct to circle against it. The headline was "Local Shelter Fights Debt. Tax Deadline Amid Land Acquisition Pressure," which was accurate if not exactly thrilling. But the story itself was, he was surprised by this, and then not surprised, because Pete Varga had been doing this for 16 years. The story was not a crisis story or a victim story. It was the story of a specific shelter with specific people in it and specific dogs, and it included a quote from Tom Dressler that said, in its entirety, "That dog is alive because those 2 did it right when doing it wrong would have been easier." And it included the information, reported without editorial embellishment, that the shelter's primary medication supplier had withdrawn its payment arrangement the same week that Coastal Acquisitions Group had begun conducting due diligence on the property. Pete had not said they were connected. He had simply put them in the same sentence and let readers decide what to do with the proximity. The response was not a tidal wave. It was not the kind of thing that goes national or appears on morning television or generates the specific digital excitement that people call going viral. It was smaller and more durable than that. It was the response of a community that had been told something about itself, that something it contained was under pressure, and had decided, not unanimously but by a clear majority, that it was not interested in losing it. Donations came in. They came from people Jack knew, from people he didn't know, from people in towns 40 miles away who had read the story online because the Courier had a digital edition and the algorithm had, for reasons that algorithms do not explain, served it to a community of people who cared about shelter animals. They came in small amounts, $20, $50, $100, and they accumulated the way snow accumulates, not dramatically, but with the logic of physics, one layer at a time. The medication supplier called Jack the following week. The representative did not explain why the policy was changing back, and Jack did not ask, because the explanation was obvious and the conversation was painful enough for the representative without requiring elaboration. The arrangement was restored. Marcus Webb called on a Friday afternoon, the 3rd week of January. He was professionally cordial. He said he wanted to revisit the conversation about the property and the offer and whether Jack had had time to consider it. Jack said he had. Marcus said he was prepared to have a more flexible conversation about the terms. Jack said he appreciated that, and that his answer was no, and that he didn't anticipate the answer changing. There was a pause on the line. A professional pause, calibrated. "Mr. Calloway," Marcus said, "the situation with your staff member's license is still a concern for us." Dr. Beaumont's temporary license was issued by the state of Maine on January 9th, Jack said. "I can send you the documentation if you need it." He had not told Claire that he was going to say this on the call, because he had not known the call was coming. But Dr. Okafor had filed a supporting statement with the Maine Veterinary Board the week after Finn's surgery, citing her remote supervision of the procedure as evidence of Dr. Beaumont's competency and professional conduct. The board had processed the temporary licensure with what the administrator described as expedited consideration, which Jack understood meant that someone on the board had read Pete Vargas' story in the Courier. Another pause. "Shorter." "I see," Marcus said. "Is there anything else?" Jack said. "No," Marcus said. "Thank you for your time." He hung up. Jack sat for a moment at Gerald's desk, under the green-shaded lamp, looking at the whiteboard. April 1st. The number below it, which he had updated that morning, was $11,400, which was what he still needed and which was, for the first time, a number that felt possible. He went out to the kennel area. Claire was doing the evening rounds, making her way down the row of kennels with the clipboard she used for the daily check notes, and the dogs were doing what dogs do in the evening, the collective settling, the organization of self toward sleep. Noodle was no longer doing figure eights. He had grown into a dog of moderate energy and definite opinions, and his opinion about the evening was that it was a good time to lie with his head near the door of his kennel and watch what was happening with the expression of a creature who has concluded that watching is participation. Rita was in her kennel, on her fleece blanket, head up. She looked at Jack when he came in. "She's good today," Claire said, without looking up from the clipboard. "Ate the whole bowl." "Good," he said. She made a note on the clipboard. He watched her write it, the quick, deliberate motion, and he thought about a lot of things in the approximately 4 seconds it took her to do this. About the call with Marcus, about the whiteboard number, about Tom Dressler's 90 seconds of crying, about a photograph of 2 boys in front of a building when the paint was still white, about the question of what it meant to stay somewhere when staying was not the obvious choice. He said her name. She looked up. "Marcus Webb called," he said. "He's done." She held the clipboard. She looked at him with the attentiveness she brought to things she considered significant. "The license came through," he said. "I mentioned it." He didn't have anything else. She looked at the clipboard. She looked at the kennel row. Then she looked at him with an expression he had seen before in smaller versions, but not this complete. An expression that contained, he thought, the recognition of something she had not let herself fully consider until now. "Okay," she said. "We're at 11-4, he said. "That's possible," she said. "I think so." She nodded. She looked back at the clipboard, and this was not a large thing, but he would remember it. She set the clipboard on the top of the kennel nearest to her, gently, in the practiced way of someone setting down something heavy, and she leaned against the kennel row and looked at him without the clipboard between them. "I didn't think it was going to work," she said. "Which part?" "Any of it," she said. "When you showed me the whiteboard that first morning, I thought, this is the kind of math that doesn't come out. I've seen it before. The numbers are against you, and then a few more things go wrong, and then you're done." "We're not done," he said. "No," she said. "We're not." He had been thinking about saying something else for approximately 3 weeks, which was too long to think about it, and he knew this. But he was a person who had learned, from carpentry, from the specific discipline of measuring twice and cutting once, from the experience of trusting a surface that looks sound and finding that it isn't. He had learned to be certain before he committed to a direction. He thought he was certain now. "I don't know what happens with the shelter after April," he said. "The grants, the fundraising, I don't know if the math keeps working." "It will," she said. "Not easily, but it will." "I want you to stay," he said. "Not just for the shelter." She looked at him. The kennel row was quiet. Noodle had closed his eyes. Rita was watching them both with the patient, slightly accusatory attentiveness of an 11-year-old chocolate Labrador who has formed opinions about things. "I know," Claire said, not as a deflection, not as evasion, but as an acknowledgement, the particular kind of knowing that means I have known this for a while and have been waiting for you to know it too. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said. They stood there for a moment in the kennel area, In the warmth of space heaters and sleeping dogs, in the old building with its leaking roof and its deliberate boiler and its name missing letters on the sign out front, and neither of them said anything else because nothing else was required. Outside, the January dark had settled completely over the property and the 3 unused acres to the north and the gravel parking lot and the county road beyond it. And the cold was doing what January cold in Maine does, which is simply its job. And somewhere in the distance the ocean was doing the same, which it had been doing without interruption or apology long before any of this, and would continue long after, which is the kind of thing that puts $11,000 and a leaking roof, and a heart in proper proportion, if you let it. April 1st came on a Wednesday. The weather was what Maine sometimes offers in April as a form of irony. Bright and cold, the sky the particular blue that doesn't negotiate with clouds, the ground still uncertain underfoot, last winter's ice visible in the shadows of the tree line along the north edge of the property. Jack had set a specific intention to work the afternoon, but found himself instead in the office, looking at the whiteboard, which now read a different number. A different number exactly. He had made the final payment to the county assessor's office the previous Friday, which Dale had received with the cheerful efficiency he brought to good news as readily as bad, and the property was now, as of the close of business on the 28th of March, debt-free for the first time in 4 years. The number on the whiteboard was 0. He had written it himself, in Gerald's red marker, and he had looked at it for a while before going to do something else, and now he was back looking at it again, which he was aware was slightly ridiculous, but which he did not feel obligated to correct. Claire came in from outside, where she had been talking to Bev from Maplewood, who had driven up to discuss a new transfer agreement and who had, in the parking lot, also discussed 3 other things that Claire was now cataloging. She had mud on her boots and the quick, focused expression of a person whose mind is already 2 tasks ahead of her feet. She looked at the whiteboard. She looked at it for a moment. 0, she said. 0, he said. She took off her jacket and hung it on the hook behind the door, Gerald's hook, which she now used without ceremony, the way you use something that has become yours. She looked at him with the expression, complete, unguarded, that she had worn in the Kennel Row in January, and she crossed the small office with its green-shaded lamp and its disaster of a desk, which was beginning to be less of a disaster as they worked through it together, and she put her arms around him with the practical directness of someone who has made their decision and sees no reason to approach it obliquely. He held her. The boiler knocked. Noodle barked once, at something, and then fell silent. Rita, in Kennel 7, probably lifted her head with her gray muzzle and her patient, opinionated eyes, and then put it down again. The sign out front still read Harvey K. Havn. They had the letters. They were getting to it.